Yeah, I wanted to include some information as I was thinking about, right now, about the Dolphin, um, battery powered, Bluetooth, um, as compared to a passive, PA speaker. Um, and the thing with this is that pile was previously what was made. Um, um, and, it seemed to be, I wanted to mention how it seemed that economics being involved with like showing what availability means of importing and exporting, even television programming. Right now seems to be the thing of television programming going all the way back to like during the JFK and Jackie Onassis, and it seemed to be, even the thing about the television programming in a way, and almost the humor involving, and it seemed to be like it's always some kind of humor about relation, between, platform and architecture and platform, embedded encryption, and it seemed to be always involving, the thing about McDonald's golden arches, a degree level of ripple centers of consensual participation, and the equator and the operator, the one and only latitude at a 90 degree, and how the one cycle per second with a center line of oscillation half above and half below being a practical application of McDonald's golden arches being side by side and becoming what is the Christian electronic schematic symbol of the fish representative of Christianity that many Christians put like on their car. It almost looks comparable to the ribbon that normally soldiers use, normally of like charitable causes. The similarities of the fish that is representative, it's a symbolic fish. It really, in my mind, originates from the half cycle above and below becoming side by side. Like McDonald's golden arches are both cycles above, the equator or the operator or the center line of oscillation. And that being the fact about it being side by side of a degree level of ripple centers of consensual participation, which is the thing about embedded encryption. Although degree terminology involving architecture, platform, embedded encryption is the degree terminology I'm normally referring to, like linguistic alphanumerics, that is normally predominantly on pronunciation itself, a practical application of principle involving alphanumeric linguistic alphanumerics. Although some words are considered to be like the idea of a dictionary and ambiguous, the ambiguity of like one word having, several different meanings. And completely separate from even that of the ambiguity of where the word is used. There might be maybe some thought of like maybe not known because it's not used or looked at, yet the information is available as ambiguous, which is a multiple definition for like one word, and only where it's used at is the definition of like the word. Yet with pronunciation involving linguistic alphanumerics, it's really based upon pronunciation, completely even separate from, the thought of like ambiguity of like one word having many meanings or, several meanings. The pronunciation is almost like a perception in a whole different manner, separate from a degree definition of intended use within degree description. In any case, like I wanted to make that clear because it seemed to be the thing about, the cycle per second. And really what I'm really ultimately getting to like right now is that all the information that I'm talking about now on my channel at WadeASVPriddy, Priddy, at youtube.com seems to be like really right now what economics provides as availability. And right now it's the dolphin thing. And automatically, I'd refer to Brian Adams about a music video that actually, I'm not even sure where it was made at. But, there's several locations. I mean, there's like a really many locations I was taken to. during a 6 to 9 month period. Kind of like really extremely like kind of traumatic of being like many air raids like while I was asleep going through the circuit. But somehow memory had been the issue. Although it seemed to be the thing of whether being able to distinguish the difference between the State of the Union address and way international and entertainment, because like there's a lot of locations of like scenes of what would it be like motion picture, and many scenes of like music video, like live in concert or music videos itself. But anyway, like it seemed to be something about like in my mind about the song with Van Halen and Sammy Hagar on the OU812, the black and blue thing. And the idea of like going to the circuit, because for like to a 6 to 9 month period, really probably 1 year if not more. I mean, really, obviously, the mind's eye is ultimately the truth about a military burial deterrent. In any case, so like a lot of that had been like kind of like a rejuvenation based upon what participation is. Yeah, so like and when I realized that memory, like once again, had become, a huge issue, and it really after 25 years, predominantly, depending on what type of a point of origin, 25 to a 30-year period, and automatically, the Vantage Love 30 thing became, the factor about what memory minus de facto seemed to be the idea of like 35, and NASA as the National Aeronautic Space Administration. And the memory minus de facto being 35 about, even alphanumeric stuff, in anatomy of the eye, E, NASA, Dodge, and several other factors, including, like the state capital of Austin, and Austin Powers Bluebonnet Imperial Eagle. Ultimately, HTTP : // and the ratio / in it. And architecture and platform, and the back-to-back thing about the design of ARO, of the state, federal, local authority thing about the structure and design of specific locations is the symmetrical, asymmetrical design being the back-to-back thing. And you'll see like a lot of movie stars and people that knows about HTTP : / and the when and where about the architecture and platform of the design of symmetrical, asymmetrical being back-to-back, or some idea of like Pentagon Reserve Reverse, even the drummer thing, the alphanumerics of 92, or the intelligence being 115, the telepathic phase, or intelligence or opposite. And the way that's designed, it's like HTTP : / is, very much representative of that, and the idea of like going, somewhere beyond, thought of anatomy in the colon, and the idea of, not necessarily dyslexic humor, but the idea of like the word relation, okay, and it is the word and a agreed term that is really of a degree intended use in computer programming and language, not really the idea automatically of, a personal issue of relationship, relation and degree terminology and all that is completely not necessarily the same, but I think that is probably the one word in that way that identifies pronunciation more so of pronunciation of practical application of principle more so than the degree, and that's probably one of the only locations that went a degree definition of intended use as a degree. It's probably that one thing about architecture, platform, embedding encryption, and the word relation that way being like based upon pronunciation of linguistic alphanumerics instead of like a different degreed term. But anyway, that's probably one of the things about it. The thing that I'm really ultimately getting to is thing about Brian Adams' music video, Thought I Died and Gone to Heaven, and like a Chris Tomlin, Holy Forever, and the black and blue thing that had been used, and realizing like a multitude of like locations of like certain settings for like motion pictures seem like certain factors of like space, geometrics of like T. Rowe Price were like certain places of like a bunch of white and gold, um, their involvement in like I would assume that it would be the idea of like a geometric design and engineering that way of uh, design. Yeah. So like anyway, so like it seemed to be something about that in my mind that seemed to be that was involved in that way. But there had been locations in like Egypt and in Europe, and I'm getting off in a whole different direction. I'm trying not to like really focus anything other than like right now on the thought of like the dolphin in television programming as compared to pile, which is predominantly what's going on. Separate from like passive PA speakers that have pretty close to like 20,000 watts with like 7 PA speakers and a 10,000 watt power amp. The thing with this is that that's kind of like really cranking it up here for a while. And some certain factors are going on, and it seems to be like really that all this that's going on is the idea of like a depreciation. Not my thought in any kind of way, nor did I choose it or like obligate it in any contractual way or any method of banking in any kind of way about like some thought as a foreknowledge. Any thought of any kind of foreknowledge has not even been in any kind of way directly, directed towards me personally. And really, I'm not really going to worry about it. The thing with this is that the idea like of deed restrictions and the idea of like mechanics liens, the thought of like television programming, the when and where, or maybe the idea of like a medical power of attorney used in the picture of real estate as a deed restriction, or the thought really in reality about television programming evolving from like Marcus Welby all the way to Quincy, and from like an in-house doctor as compared to like a medical examiner. And the thing about Quincy and sequencing, the idea of like waveform and like a quantum, the Alpha makes 170 military and even Diners Club. The thing with it is that it doesn't necessarily define Marcus Welby and Quincy as some thought is ultimately like seen in like CSI Miami. The thing about television programming, or Barbra Streisand, memories like the corners of my mind, misty watercolor memory of the way we were, scattered pictures. It's almost like a multitude of like prepaid postage, almost about advertisement, more so probably. That would probably even include probably classified ads. Seemingly the involvement, except from my thought of like anything other than Barbra Streisand and like Ryan O'Neal being my thought of like Orion Performance Monitoring. And the thing about it is that it seemed to be really some idea of like a relation in the way of Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal. In any case, it's like that and Tatum O'Neal involving. I mean, it's so like annotated in adoption abortion, almost the Roe v. Wade thing, involving performance monitoring of Orion Performance Monitoring, and now it's like the AOL of America Online, only because of a telepathic blueprint on the wall, of an alignment that seemed to be the significance of Lockheed Martin in the eccentric triangles, the two arrows being the eccentric triangles, because the line is there, with pi r squared, using radius to find a diameter, the line is there and there's going to be an answer, and what it's not showing is going to be, there invisible, and I mean, it's automatic, with my thought like Lockheed Martin and two arrows, it's still representing the idea of an eccentric triangle and a screensaver of the two eccentric triangles bouncing off each side of the wall on a monitor, overlapping and bouncing, all over. And the thing with this is that it doesn't identify the screensaver as pi r squared or the Bermuda Triangle. The thing with this is that the dolphin is on the Atlantic side of like, the Miami Dolphins. In television program, My Friend Flicka was the thing about the dolphin, okay? And I'd mentioned, something about Oracle and Cybele in Arabic. And all the commercials and, the flick, my big thing, and the thing about, even, the light being really ultimately a laser. And ultimately it seemed to be getting to like Cybele and Oracle involving, the Persian Gulf, as compared to Southwestern Belt of reach out and touch someone. The baptism, for real, seems to be, so Six Flags now it's unreal. And how Astro, turned into Six Flags and then moved to San Antonio as, Six Flags Fiesta Texas in San Antonio, Texas. The thing about, what I'm really talking about like right now seemed to be the thing about, the barrel of fun. And a coupon, it seemed to be about the barrel in the movie Austin Powers. And like a coupon I look at like every day of LASIK exclusive corrective eye surgery. And she has like white hair and like blue eyes. Yet the Austin Powers movie, I'm almost for certain my memory is serving me correctly, but she's only in a wheelbarrow for a few seconds. And it seemed to be a thing about Astral and the Barrel of Fun. But the person is like the Austin Powers, like in the wheelbarrow. If my memory serves me correctly, she does have the green eyes. But similarities between these two people in this coupon, as a current resident in my mailbox, had been like the automatic wow, look who's in the mailbox, and for real, yeah. So like in any case, that seemed to be the thing about, a current resident, as almost even the thought of like prepaid postage, and quite a bit about, the idea of like, the wheelbarrow being like, with being plural. Wheelbarrow, I think, is 109 with two S's, one on each wheels and barrels. It's like 147, like Robert E. Rubin. And ultimately, in all this information, the significance, it just seems to be so astral, so eccentric triangle, so plain horizon of importing and exporting. And the fifth dimension, singing the song, the number 5 with TH is like the alphanumerics of 33. Also, likewise, my name, Wade. Bird name, I think, MGM, and it goes on and on about, MGM ultimately getting to like a zodiac of like a Leo and the lion, and Leo being some idea of like law enforcement officer, or law enforcement organization of a zodiac of, predominantly August. Even referencing the way of like, I think it's, the idea of like, the three wise men in the desert. Ultimately, even Sarah in the tent, and the difference between Joseph and Abraham. And it's like the Father-Son thing, almost to the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, of, a baptism between what Sarah is, and I haven't went back to look to try and find it, but there's something about Sarah in the tent. And the way information has been presented, I've seen it the both ways thing. Sarah in the tent in the desert is ultimately like the idea. Likewise in this, Sarah had been, thoroughly identified as like, the most beautiful woman. It really, based on the description of during what's going on in the King James Version Bible, ultimately, really the entire King James Version Bible, it's ultimately like this coupon I'm looking at, like the heartbeat of America for real. In any case, it seemed to be the combine of what I'm really looking at and really thinking about this particular person, because because of Mercedes-Benz, and ultimately even Centerpoint Energy and the smart meter, and Mercedes-Benz distributing the smart car, smart being 71 like Pearland, and the smart for two, and ultimately even, the Scion IQ and the Saturn Sky, ultimately even the Lexus LFSA, of like a Geneva, Switzerland summit meeting 2015. All this information that I'm really getting to, it seemed to be the idea of information that Barack Obama had actually referred to as involving Al-Qaeda. And all this combine of like information that seem to be having a significance of, you know, the plane horizons, yet the eccentric triangle. The idea of the Bermuda Triangle being a screensaver, ultimately, you know, computer programming, language, and all that, and Barack Obama referring to Al Qaeda as owning its own telecommunications network, which seemed to be, you know, even involved with like Al Qaeda, involving the Pulse Club in Florida, and the information that he provided suggesting that he's trying to demonize. But the thing with this is that Cricket Wireless sells that Pulse phone, and had before previously in the Pearland, Texas area. Okay, and the thing with this is that the information in the book Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and how it's described as the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator in Latin terminology involving a mammon, is almost like the Israeli flag, the Star of David, with two triangles, the electronic schematic symbol of the delta being the triangle, or even the thought of a pi or square applied to itself, being a 6-point star and the Star of David and the Israeli flag. Yet all this information now seems to be, it's identifying, you know, some idea of categorization of money only based upon the information of the book Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and like a current event recently of Barack Obama referring to Al Qaeda, ultimately and leading to some thought of like the Pulse Club in Florida. And the thing about attenuation seemed to be, I mean, the degree of special effects and digital audio, digital signal processing of waveform. The thing with this is that from like the color codes of Los Angeles all the way to Miami, Florida, is that the Miami Dolphins is on the Atlantic side of the Bermuda Triangle and the eccentric triangle, ultimately even Lockheed Martin's thing, and even the thought of like a plane horizons of importing and exporting of eccentric triangles, yet a telepathic blueprint on the wall, it seemed to be the idea of, you know, an alignment, or, you know, thought of like the Kremlin and the Soviet Union, and the idea of the Golden Gates, you know, some idea of like a TDCJ, yet, you know, the Golden Gates, I mean, for like all the way from like TDCJ, like all the way to the Soviet Union. Ted Turner had made a statement when I was like studying, you know, audio production, television production, music video business at the Art Institute of Houston, that his statement that he did not believe in the pearly gates of heaven or the streets of gold. And the thing with this is that, you know, the pearly gates of heaven and all this information, the streets of gold, it's like the McDonald's Golden Arches being baptized during the Gold Rush and on the Wells Fargo stagecoach. So Turner, there's like a Turner High School right here in Pearland. Been here for quite some time, but it seemed to be the thing about, you know, satellite network, although Ted Turner owns his own satellite that was like him in like when I was like in broadcasting. And he just happened to be the automatic, you know, name about broadcasting and that quoted thing that he had stated. And it seemed to be like right now the thing about Cisco and Cisco Kid and Toilet Paper of the pearly gates of heaven, or some idea of like global positioning systems as some halo schematic venue on the toilet. Although, you know, Commonwealth is the thing about international financial management of, you know, multi-international banking systems. Ultimately, Commonwealth will even get to, you know, name brand. Commonwealth, yeah. Over like Reader's Digest, and wow, you know, I know all that sounds good, yeah. Heard all that before, yeah. So like the Diners Club thing about, you know, the Alphameric's 107 in military and quantum, kind of leads to a reality about that. But the thing with this is like right now I'm like thinking about television programming, My Friend Flicka, and the thing about Lassie. And here's the thing about the time frame of that was like during the Kennedy, not limited to into, you know, from, you know, I think it was like my birthday or 1964 to like pretty close to like 1969. I'm not sure how many years or actual production My Friend Flicka, or, you know, really even Lassie. But the thing is that Lassie is a collie, and it really seemed to be the thing about, you know, YouTube, being on YouTube.com, and although, Lassie is like a collie, it's kind of like YouTube as a whole different means of direction. Not that it's anything other than, brains, really. The thing with this is that a little bit of humor about, Robert Plant's song and Dancing Days. I have my power. I have cauliflower. I think it's Leslie Onassis, who knows, yeah. Or it's sort of like, I think it's Bloomberg, who knows. And it gets on into some stuff about the FBI and the One Justice Park being the idea of like the Ryan performance monitoring and the Ryan Justice. And there's some others. I'm actually going to have to practice it. But the thing about it is that television programming is presenting the Dolphin Bluetooth, a battery-powered PA system. That it even, I haven't seen anything bigger than 15-inch, like a normal standard PA speaker with dual 15-inch subwoofers. And Dolphin actually has them. At the beginning, all that I was like working on as far as like, something real quick and, a suitable amount of wattage involving a battery-powered Bluetooth, so I could have my phone and, go anywhere I want if I just wanted to. But like now, I have the Dolphin and decided to get the Dolphin because it seemed to be a little bit about television programming on the Atlantic side involving, the eccentric triangle, even Lockheed Martin, and ultimately, the 2 arrows, the 4 lines, and 3 intersecting axes, getting to, like, in my mind, of, the fifth dimension, and, the song Up in the Air in a Beautiful Balloon, and The Wall, and it seemed to be the thing about the 5 eccentric triangles, not limited to, and television series Leave Without a Trace. And I did that. I did trace my own work on the wall, but it all started because, like, once again, a small shelf on the exact opposite side of the wall, with just 2 triangles under each side as a support. And I was already thinking about that, and I already knew that the triangle is like an electronic schematic symbol of the delta, the biggest mouth of the river, yet at the same time, pi squared and a 6-point star of David as the Israeli flag. And now it seems to be that information and a misappropriation and allocation of the Mississippi, and combined with like secrets of the temple, how the footage overruns the country, and the description of the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator in Latin America is now like practical application of Barack Obama referring to Al-Qaeda, and the thought of, the mammon as Latin terminology below the equator, and practical application identifies Obama's statement as like trying to demonize you, and all that information about Al-Qaeda, and then ultimately even the Pulse Club like in Florida, and all that going on in world news, and all the information linking some idea between, South America and like Persian Gulf, and that information, yet Al-Qaeda, here's the thing about that 1 cycle per second that would normally be having like a center line of oscillation, yet McDonald's Golden Arch is presenting that information as like the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator as Latin terminology. Okay, Latin, I think it's 56. So 12, 13, 33. Anyway, yeah, so like, yeah, it's 56. Okay, like drum and plaza and light. Okay. And all this information, alphanumeric linguistics, is like leading to, me being a drummer, the bicentennial quarter as a bicentennial drummer, and the Statue of Liberty, and the 13 stars, or PG-13 rating, it seemed to be, the alphanumerics of PG being, 23, or a CEO, a corporate executive officer, or 23, like of Dr. Pepper, or W. The thing with this is that ultimately in digital audio, sequencing, characterization in sets of 6, there's a Boolean chart, and ultimately, through everything that's involved, ultimately goes to the West Wing of the White House, and the Boolean, and really it's because I was in the Stargate program and didn't even consider it that. I've always known, something about, movie stars, television, audio, and entertainment, being, you know, involved with like the thought of it, you know, the uniform when and where during the career, and, you know, like not anything new. I mean, like really, truthfully, in any kind of way. The thing with it is that the W is like an automatic English alphabet. Think about that. The acronyms of Sigma, Alpha, Delta, Kappa, Phi. Okay, and that's 4 5-letter acronyms, and the last acronym being the PHI of, you know, Phi. It's like 23 English alphabetical letters, and the 23 being the W, or, you know, the acronym CEO of a corporate executive officer. It's just that it seemed to be the when and where that seemed to be going to, I mean, of every place on the entire planet. It seemed to be the thing about the Boolean chart, and the G at the B in venue being the idea of human capital, which seemed to have the significance of ultimately, you know, the baptism, and it seemed to be more and more, I mean, without a doubt, Six Flags, June 14th, 1992, baptism at the Mormon Church in Friendswood, Texas, and ultimately it's getting to the point of a Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program, and my thoughts about Juneteenth highlighting COVID-19, I mean, in that way, and what ultimately seems to be involving television programming, involving the kernel, and how that's involved with like computer programming language, embedding encryption, and what the kernel is to a partition, yet as compared to the thought as a method of banking, as a boycott and embargo. It's really the way I see the kernel in that way, involving television programming, involving deed restrictions, or, you know, the idea of like or just the thought of a vice president network using a carbon footprint and absentee voting, or, you know, the idea of intellectual property, or, you know, the who knows anyway form of just, I mean, a name, and what's involved with like monetary and domestic, ultimately of neighborhoods. It seemed to be the thing about suppression and like loss prevention. And normally all this information isn't thoroughly discussed like the way I'm talking about it, but it seemed to be everything about really the way it is, including the method of holding and what a clearance issue is. I mean, every single day of a boycott and embargo that's normally not even discussed as that. And like when and where that actually happens, as compared to importing and exporting of protected issues of U.S. patented products, normally a tariff involved with that idea of like, you know, entering and exiting the United States of 200 miles of protected waters, and what a tariff is or is not, and in that way, yet it's the difference would seem to be the U.S. President Grover Cleveland of the $1,000 bill of human capital, of investment terminology beyond the method of banking. And all this information I'm talking about is like we're right here, right now, really about like what's going on with like economics, providing what availability means of importing and exporting, of plane horizons, eccentric triangles, and even, you know, what the deal is about center point energy, with that one frequency at a 90-degree, with center line of oscillation being like a circle with a dot in it, or center point energy being thought of the euro dollar, and center point in the way of like the thing of even a laser of like on site field scope and range, kind of like issue as compared to what would normally be maybe just, you know, a visual of like eyesight as compared to a laser. And normally that's what you'll see with a laser for the accuracy of you know, what a scope is in that way. Yet, you know, the thing with it is that center point energy presented that as like what seemed to be involving binary numbers, even I-10 of like region 1 and region 0. And, you know, trading energy, and it seemed to be a thing like even between North American Free Trade Act and NATO, and with P and without a P, and I've seen it both ways, heard it both ways, about North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization and North Atlantic Treaties Organization, with and without the P. It seemed to be the thing that's really significant, like right now, involving, you know, like during the late 60s and early 70s, about, you know, the two fingers, even Richard Nixon saying he's innocent, yet, you know, the symbol, you know, even mark with a big twin, using one hand. The thing is that it represents the word peace. Likewise, in addition, you know, the thing about victory and all that, but with NATO North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization, it presents the factor of 2 or presidential governors or PG-13 ratings that seem to have the significance of all the combined, or even monopolizing capitalization using family law. Seemingly the thought of like foster granting an adoption as compared to the thought of, managing factors that would be like intellectual property having fair use, some idea of presence managing, but not claiming ownership of the rights, and like monopolizing capitalization and using family law, or the way I see like Route 66 involving 2 VPNs as the Alphamex of 104, annuity taxation electronic, 52 twice as a VPN, but 6 being the numerical value, spelled out SIX being like 52 or hard, even the ERISA statute. Seemingly the significance of the content and information was seen to be the significance of the identical twin rainbow, and the biggest shipment in the Port of Houston involving Chevrolet Geo Prism and Hyundai Excel. Ultimately, seemingly the thing about the Alphamex 247 and the Southwest Freeway, even the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter, and in my mind, in the Houston area, the Southwest Freeway at an 8 o'clock position, whether AM or PM, is like right at a 247 degree thing, and ultimately, like Southwestern Bell, thing during the 80s, like reach out and touch someone. Real big deal about that in the 80s. Ultimately, June 14th, 1992 baptism on Saturday morning, seemingly the Six Flags thing of Vice President Networks of Southwestern Bell. Actually, what was taking place at my baptism at the Mormon Church on that specific day seemed to be, like the Blue Bell reach out, Southwestern Bell reach out and touch someone, and that was really part of like the baptism. And it seemed to be the significance of like knowing that, and that was like almost my first thought, and I was almost laughing inwardly, almost breaking out, aloud, but in my mind I was like thinking, that was my first thought, was like Southwestern Bell reach out and touch someone, and the guy reaching out and touching my heart, Rick Dees, and saying, hey, it lives here. It's kind of like I was thinking, my first thought was like, Southwestern Bell, and yeah, it better live there, yeah, for real. But anyway, several days later, it was like an experience that was like ultimately originating as thinking I never was even taught, or involving like in any kind of way knowing alphanumeric. Ultimately had been like an issue of like finding the answer of like mental telepathy minus God, or telepathic power minus God, or the thought of like a subliminal message minus 26, and ultimately the thing about Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and Secret Service. So it's like the Alphamex 151 being like the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and Secret Service. At that point when I'm sure that really anyone who finds that is ultimately going, wow, that's like not a joke, And I really never stopped, really, because of the baptism, is really when I was like looking for answers in the King James Version Bible. That just wasn't there. And reading the entire King James Version Bible, only to find what was only not in the concordance, and me thinking, you mean that's it? And really getting, beyond like extremely not cool, frustrated about that. So the experience was like completely going beyond the thought of like the King James Version Bible, including alphanumeric linguistics and the thing about the Mormon Church, and not ever really thinking that anything about Christianity would be the issue of a carbon footprint or absentee voting, or an issue of birthrights involving the Bureau of Vital Statistics, or the thought of a projected estimate as a carbon footprint, absentee voting as biometrics, and where biometrics is normally the thought of some idea of like whether it's involving the thought of security, or the idea of like fingerprints as biometrics, but ultimately anything about real biometrics will ultimately get into a bunch of white stuff of invisible programming and light scribe, ultimately the laser, and the laser had been involved in a way. I mean, other than like special effects lighting for like music video and concerts. I mean, I knew that laser, had been previous information of like, surgery, and like no scars or, I mean, it's a minimal time of like any potentially even being able to see to begin with immediately after surgery. But I mean, with laser, I mean, when it's completely healed, which is a minimum compared to like normal ideas like stitches. I mean, it's like virtually invisible, like it had never even happened. That's the thing about lasers and like surgery. Um, yeah, so like my experience going through the Stargate program, a bunch of air raids going on, and waking up and realizing like 4 inches of my humerus bone had been removed on both sides of my arms of the humerus bone, and having to lead from side to side, and other factors involving my grasping capacity. Okay, had become like beyond like extremely intense. 6 to 9 months, really, seemingly at a minimum now of like 1 year. And realizing that 25 to 30 years later, now the thought of my mind, more and more the Vantage Love 30 thing of the score in tennis involving ultimately even the rectangles on the tennis court and like Lincoln Continental identifying international financial management as a rectangle of that one Hoover ornament, international financial management on a continental level, and ultimately importing and exporting and all that about multinational national banking system as well as like multinational jurisdiction and multinational corporations, and really an experience of like me going through a Stargate program that I didn't even consider a Stargate program until like memory minus the factor and realizing memory had been a phenomenally huge issue. And that's when I started, calling it like a Stargate program. Ultimately, Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shadow Government Stargate program. But really where I was really going when I started this video, I might do it again. It's just that I don't have any gas for my generator right now. But all this information has led to like a need for like a V-twin generator. I'm looking at 28,000 watt, a Westinghouse 28,000 watt V-twin generator. Yet it seemed to be the PG of the two presidents and governors. Yet the P of like North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization and North American Free Trade Act and what trade and energy has meant based upon my perception of the smart meter and Centerpoint Energy as Region 0 is now the thought like the two being Texas, New Mexico Power and not a question of being Region 0 or the thought like the euro dollar, okay, it's just practical application of like McDonald's Golden Arches identifying the thought of like Mexico is not Region 1, Region 0, yet the center point, it identifies a symbolic representation on the back side, and Region 2 as a Eurodollar and the Statue of Liberty in New York, yet all the information on a bicentennial quarter, including a bicentennial drummer, the Statue of Liberty and the 13 Stars, and a 200-year celebration, ultimately the alphanumerics of 200 and the plenipotentiary, the Lord Jesus Christ in transportation, and the James and Law Unit in Fort Stockton, Texas, of the Permian Basin, and it seemed to be the thing about the plateau. Likewise, in addition, the footprints on a birth certificate. Likewise, in addition, graffiti and confetti, and like a political science convention, celebration, in a digitized format, a bunch of little squares, as the way I say, like almost a footprint, in birth certificates. Seemingly the thing about, Vice President networks, of a bunch of, footprints on birth certificates, and ultimately the carbon footprint and absentee voting as a projected estimate of what? You kidding me? Biometrics? As a carbon footprint? Wow. I guess that's where I like to sprite in you. It's like, well, really? Was I supposed to know that I like to sprite in anyone? Or how jurisprudence and with the black bag is ultimately the idea of like a one-word repudiation involving warehousing, linking the color code of like the black books of various states it's annotated in constitutional law and television programming with one word of warehousing. Ultimately in the thought of like predominantly the deed restriction of Dr. Pepper and television programming of litigation de facto res habeas corpus, only what lifespan means as some thought of like having an easement as intellectual property or just a name, and the thought of like a projected estimate or like a preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate. Ultimately, the idea like, like where's the identity crisis? If there's not, well then, I still haven't heard like not one word about it. The thing with this is that ultimately, it seemed to be that ultimately, I mean, going through like multinational corporations and multinational jurisdictions. yeah, all right. A circuit, huh? Ultimately, it's, a Stargate program, Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shadow Government Stargate program. And it was only because Vantage Low 30 and the thing about measuring density of light of night vision in nanoluminance, and the idea automatically the Mork from Mork, Robin Williams, and the shots about nano about the impedance and ambience. The shots about nano of the pastel green and pastel red of like night vision. I mean, like shots about nano of impedance and ambience on a 13-band graphic equalizer, identifying the density of nanoluminance of like night vision. And you'll see it on World News is predominantly that the pastel green and pastel red is predominantly, what it's truthfully always been. I think here recently they're putting like another color that's, I'm not sure if it's considered amber or a burnt orange or what the actual, it's obviously like the idea of a pastel color, like the impedances on 13-band graphic equalizer, yet of like night vision. And the red is kind of like a pastel in the sense of like being measured in nanoluminance, yet the density of a rainbow is really the same idea of, the density of a rainbow being measured in nano units, nanoluminance. And that's the thing right now seems to be the thing about the Chevrolet Geoprism and the Hyundai Excel being the alphanumerics of like Geoprism spelled with a Z instead of an S. Geoprism is Geoprism, and based upon the M is N, 13 is 14, and ultimately, 55 and heaven and sky at a 90 degree, presenting some isometric volume that way of a surface to air. It's like, wow, it's really good seeing you. Yeah, alright. So like in any case, so like getting the surface to air going on about, that, yet the thing with this is that, Geoprism is Geoprism is the alphanumerics of 247. A Robert E. Rubin quarter. The alphanumerics of like Los Angeles is president, a governor is president, YouTube is president, 109 is 110, and with the IS, the is 28, and 109 and 110 and 28 is like 247. And automatically, through like years of like studying alphanumeric linguistics, it's automatically a Robert E. Rubin quarter, United States Secretary of Treasury, representing what Paul Volcker identified during the Ronald Reagan administration in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country. I think was assigned Paul Volcker, the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, two positions. That one, I think it was two, involving economic advisor and like Secretary of Treasury. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, that Ronald Reagan assigned him with two positions in that way. And the United States Secretary of Treasury, Robert E. Rubin, is that in a whole different perspective that would identify the distinguishable difference between appreciation in real estate as compared to depreciation, or a commercial venue of living quarter that's not affected by any thought of like a depreciation as city prosecution or vandalism, or the thought of any type of idea of civil war, or a method of banking identified as a boycott and embargo, or some idea as a method of banking, ultimately some idea like some manufactured idea that a method of banking is a boycott and embargo would ultimately be only the thought of clearance of whether or not if human capital is a protected U.S. patent, or if that's even the issue of a vice president network, or knowing or not knowing, the who knows anyway form, involving, seemingly exactly that, or the idea like international citizenship is up for grabs, maybe over a star being born in an automatic new high-rise building, and someone like me just deciding like, hey, I think I feel like being a superstar. So like, I think, all that misappropriation allocation to Mississippi and the ISS and SSI and the PPI, although the ISS being International Space Station, International Superstar, International Secret Service, and the SSI being Supplemental Security Income, and Superstar Intelligence. I mean, I've just, decided to take it upon myself that hey, I feel like being a star is born and a superstar, yeah. So like, so like I'm looking at all this information about, yeah. So like bringing on, so like, where's my Diners Club card? Yeah. My American Express is kind of like, the issue now seems to be my American Express Bluebird card. It's seemingly whether or not if it's going to be the Judy Garland issue like Wizard of Oz, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. It's because, yes, during an extremely intense time that I call sometimes subconscious minus chase and 181 of Houston, Texas Electronic Power and Wind International. As compared to the word incoherence there, air raids there, while I was asleep. Not trying to just throw it off just because it's alphanumerically, geographically, as a not limited to what seemed to be the midnight blue, the uniform actually identified on the Air Force One of the President of the United States, and only as an acronym. And it seemed to be the only acronym about the FBI distinguishing whether or not it's the U.S. dollar is going to be any accusation of participation or not, as an acronym of the Federal Bureau of Investigation being an acronym as the FBI, or, the Foreign Bureau of Interrogation. Yet it seemed to be presenting, the idea of like the midnight blue that way during 1995, the World Trade Center. I know that only what's been shown based upon the availability of what's been shown on K television as 2001. I mean, it's a difference of 6 years anyway. And it seemed to be, the alphanumerics is 6, and even the Boolean chart and principles of digital audio and sequencing characterization and sets of 6 involving, waveform and quantum of live auditing. In any case, so like, all that like been going on in my mind, and now it's kind of like, the Dolphin is being made available because I'm kind of like really kind of focusing like right now, because I'm just going to get like bigger PA speakers and probably 18-inch, dual subwoofer, PA speakers. But right now I'm kind of like working on the battery power pack, because it seemed like electrophysiology had been involved with like the Consumer Report and price indexes. It's like, don't throw all the Consumer Report and price index off as some idea, as just because Reader's Digest is presenting some idea of television programming. Somehow electrophysiology seemed to be, even what was in the food and drink, and it made it everywhere. I shop like at Kroger's before I even realized it. And factors that I immediately, never experienced or really heard ever explained. Automatically, I'm knowing that it's like the atmosphere inside of my home became like weather conditions of being electrically charged and shocked in midair while I'm playing my drums, okay? And that really normally probably wouldn't even be able to happen unless other factors were involved, like consumption involving food and drink and beverage. And realizing that had been taking place, and like looking right at it would seem to be, a foreknowledge of like performance monitoring. In the entire immediate area, not limited to. And certain factors that had led to like 911 calls and going to the emergency room as admitting diagnosis of congestive heart failure. There was like a lot of things going on, and really the electrophysiology was not my automatic thought of electrophysiology or my home's conditions inside turning in as an atmospheric, not really depression, yet involving what seemed to be, like weather conditions involving getting shocked in midair of electrophysiology. And, you've heard of like static shock. What the perception of what was going on with me was like more so on the neurosensory side, not really muscular cramps, but being like progressively a duration that seemed to affect more the nerve and the neurosensory, and the tendons and ligaments, even the bone more so, of cramping. I mean, unlike anything. It's almost like a person realizing, maybe comparable, not laughing really at all, but a person that knows that had laughed so hard that even the cartilage between the ribs had become an awareness, like I didn't even know there was like muscles in between, or my cartilage seemingly to feel like cramping muscle in between my ribs, laughing that hard, that long. It's ultimately the idea of an experience on a neurosensory side of cramping, and more so in the joints as compared to actual muscle mass. A whole different type of like cramping, yet affecting respiratory. The thing with this is that, in addition, the idea of like circulation issues, ultimately exposure to like quite a bit going on in my home, affecting what would be thought of like the bone marrow being affected by exposure, and in turn affecting the immunoglobulin of the immune system, causing an overabundant amount of white blood cells to be produced, called amyloidosis, and normally it's only referred to during oncology, for cancer treatment involving chemotherapy and radiation and exposure, to like a bunch of x-rays, even blood transfusions, and the idea of like a phlebotomy, identifying a blood count to make sure any transfusion or infusion that the body has a specific blood count of red and white blood cells that's determined to be an experience, a standard as accepted for like, going ahead and going through like chemotherapy or blood transfusion or and the infusion. But anyway, it involving phlebotomy, that way automatically red and white blood cell, and realizing something about, that circulation in that area, the guy, affecting, some idea of length. I mean, a whole bunch of factors were going on, and even the endocrinology involving the pituitary gland, and how it affects the idea of circulation. I mean, like, when the time's right, the thought of like, wow, hey, it's good seeing you. So like anyway, so like somewhere in the mind, the pituitary gland, it's like the effect of the erection. The thing with this is that ultimately the white blood cell in circulation, in combination with like all that presenting what seemed to be blocking circulation, and a conflict of interest in that way between the pituitary gland and the idea of relation, as compared to a normal thing about circulation. I mean, like, anyway, had been like an issue that I didn't even know about, and realized even going to urology, that should have been, I mean, like, one of the first things I should have heard. Even brought it up several times, and it's kind of like, I mean, like, really, am I experiencing an entire world network of depreciation? You kidding me? As a preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate in my name, as a vice president network of a carbon footprint, an absentee voting, as some idea of like depreciation as compared to human capital over what television programming, or some idea of PG-13 rating involving whether or not if appreciation is going to represent annuity as compared to settlement of like depreciation, or whether or not if a stationary engineer is the thought and idea of what managing factors is as a standard of what seemed to be like not a neighborhood, any neighborhood. It seemed to be the suppression, I mean, of that fact. And it's just like, I just happen to be the one that seemingly my birth year seemed to be in this geographical area. I mean, even Six Flags baptism had become an issue of whether or not, if Vice President Immigration Custom Enforcement, and all of a sudden after the baptism, it's kind of like a 6-month period had happened as a result of 3 phone calls, and realizing the 6-month period after the 3 phone calls, I mean, it's so 6 in presidential and vice president network that ultimately led to like the demanded requirement of participation going through the circuit. That's some idea of like some experience it, you know, in any case. So, like, me making, you know, the best out of everything that normally I'm involved with anyway, was doing that, and, this is what it sounded like now, anyway. In any case, so, like, ultimately, you know, my thought, like, of We International, Warner Electra, and Atlantic, and how the Atlantic is identifying the dolphin, like, now, or, you know, backtracking the history of a television screen, going from, like, monochrome into Technicolor and the pastel colors of Technicolor into, like, live on air, the thing about, you know, living color, and the transition of history of the television screen from, like, monochrome to, like, the color, you know, digitized format, and conversion from, like, you know, analog to digital. Yeah, so, like, all that's going on, and now it seems to be, like, right now, as the idea as a projected estimate that the suggestion, the power of persuasion, a persuasive technique of thinking, is automatically, you know, probably the thought of, like, you know, me going to be a drummer just because someone has some idea of, like, the delta force and a persuasive technique of thinking that was probably designed to possibly not know the difference and be used as some idea of a conscious awareness as a reaction, not really that, I mean, like, really at all, a lot of the times. Really, after the baptism, seemed to be that I became subconsciously, more consciously aware, unlike anything about, you know, an experience that had ultimately led to the thought of mental telepathy minus God equal Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and, you know, the thing about Secret Service, and the alphanumerics that way, or telepathic power, alphanumerics 177, and then the reality of, like, the subliminal message minus, you know, 26, God guard, God card, dog game, lie. The alphanumerics of 26 applied to 177 minus 26, and all that, like, going on, really because of an experience of a baptism. Then not many hours later, an experience of, like, some, like, idea of, like, of a heart god in the name Robert. Ultimately, you know, my thought, like, you know, it's like, what's going on in my body, you know? Get a spiritual experience that, you know, the idea of, like, something other than, you know, the idea of, like, live on air, and, like, the experience going through a circuit and realizing that I've been operated on and didn't even know it, and thinking, how could that have possibly happened, and me not know it. The thing with this is that an extremely intense time going through a circuit, being aerated while I was asleep. I mean, not really limited to that at all, but unlike any other duration, a 6 to 9 month period now seemingly an automatic, an entire full year, 1 year, and realizing that it happened. And the thing with it is that, you know, a specific idea of a heart god and some idea of escrow or an FBI miracle and the name Robert, ultimately the name in the book, Secrets of the Temple, How the Pastels Runs the Country. I mean, after this experience, I mean, you know, I'm, like, looking for answers and not finding them. And automatically, you know, it's like, you know, thinking about, you know, money and a biblical scripture, money is a defense. And the thing about the Word of God is hidden in the heart, I mean, doing a whole bunch of reading beyond, you know, what was in the concordance, okay? And ultimately, it got to, you know, thought of, like, the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Pastels Runs the Country. And I was looking for anything for, like, a heart god, any name, specifically Robert, and money as some idea, and trying to grasp what all that symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS on the backside of the US $1 bill really is. I mean, I had the US dollar in my wallet, I mean, every freaking day, and really knew that Novus Ordo Circular was, like, on it. I knew it Comptus, I mean, but it didn't have any significance other than it being, like, $1 and what I could get for it. But in 1992, which now seemed to be Juneteenth, highlighting COVID-ID-19 as Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shutter Government Stargate Program, and how the colonel is and is not involved with, like, the Ajax language. Ajax being 36, like, chasing oil, and like the TP of a telepathic TP. The thing is that, like, really, in any case, Ajax seems to be like the white language that a kernel is and is not, but ultimately, a kernel being involved seems to be whether or not if the idea of participation of a deed restriction involving television programming, a continual issue of just turning television on, or the idea of like legal media and deposition as some idea of like litigation de facto and res habeas corpus, or suppression and loss prevention as like really, I mean, is someone like really deciding that they're going to want to leave the bank and K television, even W television, or, the information that seemed to be ultimately getting to a commercial venue, a whole annuitized version of a way of life as compared to being some thought of, some idea of like just a person being used as intellectual, as being some idea, legal tender for all debt, both public and private, not even knowing what debt is as compared to a debit, or, what the deal is about the constitutional law, having freedom of speech and freedom of press, and the idea of like, copyright law, not breaching copyright law, yet not infringement based upon intellectual thing about, having fair use, but not claiming ownership of the rights. I mean, it ultimately gets to, the same difference between annuity or royalties, or what intellectual duration is in television programming, of like the real information. And you've heard it before, don't be fooled by imitations. Practice makes perfect, I mean, for real. I mean, not that it has to be an identity crisis, but, the who knows anyway for him. The who knows what anyway for him. A method of banking as a boycott and embargo is a method of holding. I mean, like, does that happen like every day in every neighborhood? Or is it just like, I just feel like talking about it and have something to say about it? In any case, so like it got to that, and now it seemed to be the thing about My Friend Flecka and Lassie. You had a Brian Adams video, and Chris Holland about the black and blue, and the mind's eye thing about, the particular location involving what seemed to be the dolphin, what was not actually my thought or any kind of memory or capacity being in any kind of way even able to remember, considering everything that was involving, like I say, like going through the circuit, being aerated at different locations, and realizing 25 years later that I was taken to a bunch of locations involving We International in entertainment, motion picture. Even State of the Union Address seemed to be the Outbreaks 192 and the Transfiguration, seemingly of what seemed to be of the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program. I didn't even consider it anything about that. But when Vantage Love 30 became, like, I mean, a major, huge factor about that, and memory minus de facto being the idea of, like, Austin Powers, Blue Bonnet, Imperial Eagle, and a combine of, like, experiencing something like that and realizing that, it had been an issue, and it's already going on like an hour and 8 minutes. Now it seemed to be the thing about the dolphin, and a little bit of humor identifying like a duration of presidential term in office as, JFK, John F. Kennedy, and, Jackie Onassis, but a little bit of humor about, at the time, Lassie being on television, and My Friend Flecka, and a little bit of humor, about, thing about, I have my power, I have cauliflower, I think it's, Lassie Onassis, who knows? It's alright. She said it's alright. It's all inside of my heart. Lassie Onassis, a presidential administration. What? A grandfathered corporate law as retroactive presidential administration. A little bit of humor. It's like, what are you on? And I'm almost thinking that's why Jackie Onassis' name is representative of HTTP:// and Commonwealth of International Banking Systems involving SANS software. Even the thought of, like, what seemed to be the thing about television programming, predominantly of, like, during the JFK administration and right after, wow. Nixon, I actually have to think about how long, and right before, during and after, like, JFK, in between, like, Nixon, that specific period, I actually have to think it's the Lyndon B. Johnson thing, and I think it is, and how television programming in Clear Lake, Texas, being Alphameric's 137 in Washington, D.C., or Holy Seagull spelt with like two L's, and the color code of like the space shuttle. You had a Holy Seagull, and it would seem to be the actual ratio between the black and white actually combined as like a color of like monochrome in the history of a television screen, and the silver silk screen. It seemed to be the ratio of the black and white of the space shuttle, and likewise, a Holy Seagull. I'm almost for certain it probably is why, monochrome and the silver silk screen is exactly the color it is, because of a Holy Seagull. Being alphanumeric of like, likewise, think about MGM being bird name, and it would seem to be, not limited to, but like a Better Business Bureau bird baptism, seemingly the thing of like, yes, the psychic war, America's foremost psychic spy, and the cover-up of the CIA's top secret Stargate program. In any case, so like I'm getting to where I need to take a break, but I was like really wanting to stay on that direction between what seemed to be of the Bluetooth involving, the Dolphin Bluetooth loudspeaker on the Atlantic side in Wing International of like Warner, Electra, and Atlantic, and the eccentric triangles ultimately getting to the fifth dimension, and the telepathic blueprint on the wall, and Lockheed Martin's arrows, and the eccentric triangles that way. You had a 232 count of Lockheed Martin at the same location of the building, and asymmetrical design, ultimately the thought of HTTP colon being the back-to-back double / and the ratio thing about it. It ultimately got through the fifth dimension song, Up in the Air in a Beautiful Balloon, ultimately the nanoluminance and the pastel colors, and right back to the 13-band graphic equalizer and night vision of the pastel green and the pastel red. And yay, okay. The book cover, Orion's Performance Monitoring, presenting the hot air balloons, and only because of the altitude and temperature creating the condensation and evaporation, which are the mandatory requirements of a rainbow, yet measured in nanoluminance of night vision. And same with the whole idea of Juneteenth highlighting COVID-19 as like, Abraham Lincoln night vision shadow government Stargate program. I mean, over a baptism. And to this day, after Flag Day, Saturday morning, June 14th, 1992, several other factors had happened. And, well, here I am in a tent in my own home. Not that I feel like a carbon footprint or amphibious, or my halo schematic ass on the globalized international financial tool device and mechanism, my toilet and Commonwealth, providing some highlighted information for Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program. Canvassing my halo schematic ass beyond the abstract satire and the more presentable, color-coordinated pastel. The thing about, oh God, yeah, finer arts and humanities. The finer arts and humanities thing about the abstract satire and the more presentable pastel, the Commonwealth of International Finance and Management. Yeah, so like anyway, I'm gonna take a break, so like yeah, so anyway, there it is, okay.